High cortisol could be the reason you struggle to lose body fat, but maybe not for the reason that you think. I'm Mandy, I'm a registered clinical nutritionist with Body Reset, and I see every single day firsthand just how much stress and cortisol does have an impact on people's weight loss goals, on their health goals in general. And I really want to talk about this today because I think there's some misunderstanding here, but I also want to give you some tools to leave from this with in order to mitigate this. Because let's face it, we live in a world where stress is actually a part of life. It always has been for humankind, but that has not changed. We are always going to be faced with certain stresses, which means we're always going to have certain elevations to our cortisol levels. And I think the real benefit here comes in understanding just how much that impacts our bodies so that we can be proactive about dealing with it and not become a victim to it. So I want to break this down into two parts. I want to look at it. Why does cortisol get blamed for weight gain? What's it actually doing in our body? And then number two, what's the secondary impact of this elevated cortisol that's perhaps having the bigger impact on our body composition goals? So the first part is, what is cortisol actually doing? Cortisol is a stress hormone. When we're faced with any type of stressor, whether that is an internal stressor, i.e. our body is not feeling good, we've perhaps got some inflammatory responses going on, we've eaten something that hasn't agreed with us, or maybe it's an external stressor like a true stressor where you've just had to rush to work or something like that, or maybe it's more of a psychological stressor where you're thinking through some stressful processes. Wherever stress is coming from, it causes an elevation of our stress hormone cortisol. Cortisol's role in the body is to free up energy so that we can escape a threat. It increases our blood sugar levels so that we've got really readily available, the fastest available fuel source to our cells in order to get away from something. It's a survival mechanism, which is why it's a really, really great thing. But if you have elevated blood sugar levels, what also happens? There's another hormone that comes into play here, and that is insulin. Insulin is a storage hormone. Insulin helps you take glucose from your blood and put it into your cells, either to be burned as energy or to be stored as fat if you're not utilizing that energy. So let's play this out. You have a stress response, cortisol goes up, blood sugar goes up as a result of that, and then insulin comes to the party and takes that glucose, that blood sugar, into your cells, either to be burned or stored. Now, this stressor that you had, it was about some email pressure. It was something at work. It was something that you needed to sort out. You were sitting there typing away, thinking a lot, burning some energy, but not as much as what was freed up. So that extra glucose, which is available, is packaged into fat for storage. We can't just have glucose running around in our bloodstream. It does damage. Our body's protective mechanism is to take that excess glucose, turn it into a fat, store it in our fat cells. So we can look at this in a couple of ways. If you have elevated cortisol and then elevated blood sugar and then elevated insulin, the storage hormone, and you're not eating in excess, so you're not continually bringing more glucose into your body, you're just eating at a maintenance amount, what's going to happen is you're going to have a conversion of some of your metabolic tissue, your muscle mass and whatnot, into fat mass. So what we see here really, really often is people getting softer, squishier. They used to be more toned. They still weigh the same weight, but they don't feel as strong. They feel a bit flabbier. And it's this movement, it's a transfer of stored energy from muscle into fat mass as a result of the cortisol, blood sugar, insulin response. Remember, insulin is a storage hormone. It takes the glucose which is there and it either helps you to burn it, but if you're not burning it, it will put it into storage. And so we have this transfer of tissue, of available energy from muscle mass into fat mass. Let's say this is a very simplistic way of looking at it. There's a whole lot more complexity to the whole system as it goes deeper and deeper, but just a bit of an understanding of what we commonly see there and what people feel. They're like, I used to be strong and lean, I haven't changed weight, but now I feel a little bit softer. Let's play out another scenario. What if the same thing happens? You have that stress response, and within that, you're also eating in excess. So you're constantly supplying more energy to your body at that same time. Not only is your sugar elevated as a result of the stress, your sugar is elevated as a result of the food you're eating. So the availability of excess energy there is even higher. So again, your insulin does its job. It packages that energy away into fat for storage, and you gain weight over time. Was it the cortisol's fault? It absolutely played a part in it, but the excess energy is what actually led to the weight gain. The same scenario could play out for someone who's eating in a deficit, i.e. they're not eating. This is the person who goes through a stressful time and you see them 3 months later and they've lost heaps of weight and you wonder what happened, and they're like, well, it hasn't been very good. What happens here is cortisol goes up, blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up, energy gets stored, but because they're not providing enough energy, energy is getting burnt, and so they lose weight as a result. So cortisol is still playing a part. It's moving where that available energy is, but it's either depending on your actions determines whether it is stored or burnt. So this is why cortisol is really confusing, because yes, cortisol has a massive role to play here. It determines where that energy goes, and it's about freeing up that glucose and making it available to you. That initiates the response of insulin, and insulin determines where it goes from there. What I think gets missed in this whole discussion is that the secondary part with that elevated stress response and that elevated cortisol is it doesn't just impact what's going on inside our body, it also impacts what's going on outside of our body. It impacts what we do on a daily basis. And I want to share a story here. The time in my life when I felt like I had the least control over my weight, the time when I weighed the most, the time when it was creeping up and I didn't seem to be able to manage it, was also the time when I had the worst unmanaged chronic stress. I was a chef. I worked in a role where I was way outside of my depth. I just kind of got thrown into it and expected to kind of carry this role forward. I wasn't getting paid very well. I didn't get many hours off. I don't know if you've ever been a chef before, but hours of work are pretty crazy. And I felt quite trapped. Financially, I couldn't leave the job. I couldn't get a different role. I had to keep showing up, and I had this kind of chronic unmanaged stress. Now, I could have blamed the stress for the weight gain, but the reality was it was the situation surrounding it that changed the habits that I'd once had. I used to walk and exercise, and I no longer did because I was tired and stressed. I used to eat really well, and I no longer did because I was just eating on the go. I was eating for comfort. I was eating higher sugar because my body was looking for this kind of sweet craving and quick energy. I wasn't sleeping well, and I just wasn't really very happy. So the weight gain that I had at that time was absolutely about the stress, absolutely about the cortisol, but it wasn't the cortisol's fault. It was the habits that changed as a result of the stress. And this is what I really want people to be able to take away from this is, yes, cortisol does have an impact on weight gain, but it doesn't override kind of the science of the fact that in order to lose weight, you need to eat less than what you are consuming. And when you are more highly stressed and you do have a higher blood sugar level and you do have a higher insulin level as a result, we need to be more careful with how we're really managing that. And more often than not, it's less about the food and more about the habits that we're using to protect our energy, to protect our habits, and all of those sorts of things. So what we do with clients, and why I think our approach is very different but also very, very effective, we work with hundreds of business owners and busy people, CEOs, people that really are carrying a high stress load, and we're not telling them to stress less, but we're looking at ways to really manage that and manage their habits within that time frame. So what we do is we look at two key things. One is a structured meal approach. This is to really target blood sugar balance and blood sugar stability. So we look at 3 to 4 meals a day with a really strong protein focus, lots of fiber in there, and really timing where we're putting carbohydrates and the quality of the carbohydrates that we're recommending. It's not that carbs are bad, it's just that if there is already a higher stress response, a higher cortisol level, and a higher blood sugar level as a result, throwing more glucose into the mix is not actually helping the situation at all anyway. What we want to be doing is fueling for stability and fueling for a good balance of energy throughout the day. So meal structure, timing, and then kind of how you're actually making up those meals. The second part of it is looking at lifestyle design. Stress is not something where you kind of go over a certain level and now this is everyone's stress. It's a threshold of tolerance. And so when it comes to stress, it's less about saying, let's just stress less, and more about knowing what stresses are in my life that are part of my life and that even maybe a good part of my life. Maybe they're even something you look forward to, that kind of work pressure on a project or those sorts of things. But how do I recognize the fact that those are going to have an impact on my blood sugar level and manage that? And I've used this description before in some of our live trainings of stress being a little bit like a balloon. You can blow in and blow in and blow in and blow that balloon up as big as you want, but at some point there is a breaking point. And it's not that you need to let all the air out, but sometimes you just need to let a little pressure out. A little bit of pressure out and manage the actual load of what's going on in that balloon. And so this is where the lifestyle design piece comes in. It's not about not stressing or having any air in the balloon. It's about making sure that you're letting out enough from time to time in order to keep that total volume down. And this is where we look at time blocking, looking at what an ideal week looks like and what your current week looks like. Where are you making sure there's some time for you in there? Where are you prioritizing things like a 10-minute walk or getting to bed on time and whatnot so that you can show up in a better state and actually manage the stresses that are part of your life that you've actually chosen because they're part of your career or whatever. So these are the two things that we do. We dive into this in our coaching program, and the cool part is you actually get access to that. Linked below this video is our gut reset. This is our 28-day self-guided program that dives into a lot of the stuff that we work with our clients in the first part of our coaching program, looking at things of how to set up your meal structure, but also how to set up your day structure to be more resilient to the stresses you're presented with so that cortisol doesn't have to drive weight gain. Because I also see amongst all of the people that I work with, a whole lot of people that are really managing stress really well. They would live what most people would term a highly stressful lifestyle, and yet they've got a body composition that they're proud of. They're not consistently gaining weight, and they feel strong and healthy as well. So that is available to you. Click the link below, dive into that. So hopefully this was helpful in understanding just how cortisol really impacts and what you can do to manage that going forward. I'll see you next time. Bye.